Hi, I'm James and welcome to a second review of the new Twilight 2000 material that's coming out. This time we've got this, which is Service Rifles of Europe and North America. It's written by Thorsveen. I apologise now if I've mangled your name. I'm just seeing further down it's Gear Ove Thorsveen. It's intended, as it says, to cover the service rifles of Europe and North America. It was, I think it was $8.95 on Drive Thru RPG. So it's a bit more than the last one I did. So what did I think of it? Well, it's nicely illustrated. All of the weapons have their own illustration, which I think is a nice touch. And you will find that there are multiple versions of certain weapons. I'll pick one completely at random. So for example, when we look at the Steyraug, there's the Steyraug A1, which is the rifle version, and the Steyraug A1C, which is the carbine version. We'll just pick another one. So we've got the G3, which has got the G3A3, G3A4 and the G3KA4. So you get variation within it, which it's nice. So there's a fair few weapons, but let's sort of break down what we get. The illustrations, they've used one or two from the previous versions. Sorry, from the main rulebook. There's new illustrations, generally line drawings of all the ammunition types and the weapons. So there's a bit of a history as to service rifles and what's changed sort of from World War II onwards. Talks about particularly from the M1 Garand onwards. It's worth noting that there were semi-automatic rifles before that. The Russians had them, and bizarrely the Mexicans with a Mondragon rifle. So there is a lot of variation in the history, but from a one-page summary it's pretty good. So let's go through what weapons we've got in it. We've got the AEK 971, which was a trial Soviet weapon that wasn't actually adopted rather. It covers everything quite nicely in there. Wasn't one I was particularly up on. You got the AK-74 of 4 variants. You got the standard, the AK-74M, which was the more modernised version. You've got the AK-74N or N2, which had the night sight variants, and the AK-S74, which had the folding stock. Now, I like the touch that he's actually added some extra quite useful bits of information in there. So for example, you've got an availability, and he's looked at it in different areas, including Europe, the United States. So it's quite a useful little touch there. Also of interest is the fact that you've actually got a good way to handle folding stocks by reducing the encumbrance slightly. I thought that was a nice idea. So that was quite a good one. We've got the AKS-74U, which in the West tends to be known as the Krinkov. That's quite a useful one to have included. You've got the AK-100, which was intended as the AK-74's replacement, but never really got there. We've got the AKM, again with variants there. There is a slight mistake I spotted there, which it talks about the AKMS having a side folding stock. The AKMS generally had an underfolding stock in the same way that the MP38, MP40 stock worked. In fact, it's probably even based on that. So that it makes no difference in game terms. Does slightly in reality, in that you can't actually fold the stock with the magazine fitted very well. So that's just a little note from me. You got the AN94, which was another intended replacement for the AK-74 series. You got the AS-VAL, which was the silent sniper rifle. Nice one to have included. You've then got a page on Soviet motorised infantry units, which I think is really good. It explains what everybody would be carrying. I did come across a couple of notes. The BTR sections would generally have an extra soldier. It talks about the RPG gunner carrying an AKS-74U, Yeah, by the end of the period, it's worth noting that earlier in the period, or for reservist units, they'd have probably carried the PM pistol instead. I know there was an attempt with the APS pistol to try and give them a fully automatic weapon, which never really worked. Even the manual recommended you had to fire that lying down. In real life, it's worth noting that there was a change in who carried the GPU-25 grenade launcher. Around 1990 it was being carried by the squad leader. By the late 90s it's actually gone to the senior rifleman. So that might be something to bear in mind for your more up-to-date units. It's also a second one was sometimes added, given to the rifleman. Now, the SVD Dragunov sniper rifle. There seems to be a bit of debate as to how often it was issued. Most sources I come across give it as one per platoon, so one of the marksmen would have it. However, earlier in the 70s and then into the 90s, you actually would find that they issued one per squad. So you can get the answer of 3 or 9. The book seems to have taken a middle ground of 6. I've never come across a source that gives it 6. You pay your money, you take your choice. I mean, Afghanistan, they went up to 1 per squad, even with smaller squads. So, yeah, bear in mind, this is the textbook organisation, and we know textbook organisations change. And it talks about having the AK-74N or N2. Generally, that's going to go to the senior rifleman. It's worth noting that in the Soviet army it was very different to how the West did it, where your senior rifleman was often probably more experienced than often the platoon, section leaders definitely. NCOs were basically draftees as well and would just get extra training on that, whereas the senior rifleman was probably somebody coming to the end of his service and was really the powerhouse of the squad. So yeah, but it's nice. It's a whole page on that. I think that was nicely done. We've got a few more weapons though. We've got the Beretta AR 70 and 90, the Canadian C7 rifle, which it doesn't say but was actually used, well, is still used by British Special Forces. So you might come across that there. The C8, it does mention that being used by quite a few nations' special forces. We've got a page history on the Armalite, which is quite a nice background. I quite like that. I mean, it mentions the Stoner's AR-18 and AR-180. I've actually changed history slightly in my campaign, where Sterling didn't go under in the time period, and what I actually have is some of them being issued as surrogate rifles. When SA-80 production doesn't keep up. So it's nice to see. It mentions the Stoner as well, one of my favourite guns. If you're a Morrow Project player, you'll actually remember that quite well. We've got the Car 15 and a good explanation about all the different variants, like the XM177, the XM177E2, and it notes, hey guys, the difference is that minor, use the same stats, which I fully agree with. I did notice as well, there's a nice breakdown of who actually used them. The only one I think I did notice missing was the fact that they were used by dog handlers in Vietnam. They were quite popular for that, and squad leaders would sometimes try and acquire them, platoon commanders definitely. But yeah, it's nice. And as a bit of useless trivia, they do actually get used by the UK Special Forces. There was a debate for years, and there is a scene in the film Who Dares Wins where one appears for a few seconds. Given the fact that the advisors were anonymous, shall we say, when you look at the titles, that's probably fairly accurate. What else? We've got the Setme L, which is the Spanish service rifle. The French FAMAS, with some nice little details on there, particularly about the magazines being faulted because they're originally designed as one use. One thing it doesn't mention is the fact it's actually ambidextrous, but this is me being really picky, probably because of the fact I'm so used to the SA-80 series, which can't be fired left-handed, other than 1 or 2 of the prototypes. You got the FN FAL, which frequently been regarded as the battle rifle of the free world. Yeah, I like that one. That's nicely included. You've got a few variations of that, including the heavy barreled one, which is a nice touch. The FNC, which was the 5.56 companion to it. The HK33, again talks about sort of special units using that. So that's quite another nice one. We've got half a page on German service rifles. Now, the authors decided to use the G41 as the main German rifle, with the G3 sometimes being used by reservists, possibly the AK being used by reservists, and latest troops getting issued the G36. He has the G11 in the game and stats for the G11. Which to me was the gun that summed up Twilight 2000. Now, my background, I've gone for assuming that even with the reunification, there was a move to keep the armaments up to date, so I have the G11 being issued. I didn't have as widespread an issue as probably would have happened if the Berlin Wall hadn't come down. And I've given the G41 to the rear area troops, which was always part of the intention. I'm always surprised that they went for two different calibers. That never quite made sense to me. You can do that if you want. You could alternatively decide that the G11 doesn't get built at all. You can have a small issue like in the game. It's entirely up to you, and it goes on the background that you want to have. The one thing that would tie in with that is I think it would be quite viable. The game doesn't have in the AKMR from earlier editions, which was always a favourite of mine. It was basically an AK rechambered for 5.56. So you could easily create a German version, which would probably be the MPI KM 5.56, you could call it. Something like that. It's entirely up to you. Again, it's your game, do what you like with it, which seems to be the standard sort of feeling. We've then got the G3. Spotted a little it's terminology error in there. It talks about 43 Commando or 4-3 Commando Fleet Protection Group Royal Marines. During the time period, they would actually still be in Kamakyo Group or Kamakyo Company, but they did carry on the lineage of 4-3, and then when it was expanded post Cold War, it did actually become 4-3 Commando. So yeah, just a little thing there. We then got the stats for the G36. Yeah, really popular in the UK with police forces, it's worth noting. Whether it would have been in the game, I don't know. Bearing in mind that in the UK, the reason that HK stuff got bought was because HK became a subsidiary of the British firearms, simply because, and the Royal Ordnance, because it basically went out of business when the G11 wasn't bought. So that might be something to consider. You've got the G41 that we've mentioned, the Galil, the Israeli rifle. I'm not 100% sure why that's in there, although it does note there was some use by the Swedish police, so I suppose perhaps that's why it's in there. You've got the L85A1, the SA80 rifle. You've only got the A1, the A2 doesn't appear in game terms. I think there would have probably been a rush to create an A2. I also would probably include a couple of other little ones, such as the L98, which was the single shot cadet version of it. That's something I would probably add in, but that is me knowing a lot about British firearms, having carried them. So yeah, we've got the M16. Yeah, that obviously needs to be in there, and details then on US rifle platoons. Again, I find the information is really good, but I'll just extend it slightly. In mech platoons, the Dragon, the M47, was actually issued to the squad, replacing one of the riflemen. And instead of having a weapons team, there were two machine gun teams, with the M240 late on, M60 earlier, but no squad. So they were actually independent. They didn't have a commander, so there were just two pairs there. Light infantry was slightly different. They had 6 Dragons at company level, and they did have a weapons squad with the 2 machine guns with a commander. The Rangers, now their weapons squad was slightly different. It had 3 M60s or M240s, the Dragons, and potentially 90mm or Carl Gustavs, were all held at company level. So the information there is really good. Just a little bit extra just to help you with that. I did an awful lot on that on my review of the 15mm Peter Pig US Marine Corps figures. I'll put a link in the description. So we then move on. We've got the M4 and the M4A1 carbine, the Czech VZ58, which appears no end of times in films and people think it's a Kalashnikov. It's not. We've got the SIG 540 and variants, SIG 550 and variants, Steyr-Aug, the Valmet RK62 and the 92, so we have those there. We've then got half a page on Polish service rifles. You've got details then of a unique Polish rifle, the WZ 1960 PMK, which was designed for firing rifle grenades, unlike most of the Kalashnikov series. It talks about having to change the regulator and so on. I think it needs a couple of rules for that. I would suggest probably 2 slow actions to be able to change from one configuration to the other. Not having had hands-on one of how long it does take, that would be an estimate. I'm quite happy for people to suggest otherwise. You've then got various later Polish weapons, which were beyond the ones in the original editions, because these came in the 90s. You've got the 1988 Tantol. Well, okay, that was probably just being developed, but we weren't aware of it at the time. The 1989 Onyx, again, Polish weapon. So there's quite a range of weapons in there. I did spot a couple that were missing, which were the M231. Again, it was a very iconic weapon from the original game, and also from a British perspective, the SLR, the L1A1, which is basically a FAL but only capable of semi-automatic fire, unless you know the trick with the matchstick. So they probably need adding. I mean, I really hope he does a second edition of this, because I really found this was really good. We've also got then sort of a summing up of the availability. It talks about the availability for Poland, Sweden and the US. That's quite good. You've then got a weapons summary table with some new codes coming in. So it talks about things like having suppressors included. Does the weapon have a bipod? I notice, although it's mentioned in the text, there's no reference to the fact that the Galil has got a bottle opener built in. Lovely bit of trivia that was built in to stop troops using magazines as bottle openers. Yeah, it doesn't really need going on the charts, but it's just a useful bit of trivia. So we've got a page and a half of that. Some new and updated equipment, so it talks about some of the different grenade launchers, laser sights, night vision goggles, optical sights, reflex sights, rifle grenades, telescopic sights, flashlights. They're all built in there. He also talks about the difficulty of fitting sights to weapons that aren't designed for them, particularly the AK series, where the top cover would be your normal mounting point, so they have a side rail on them. So little things like that, and a few rules to sort of help with that. There are some new rules in here to add a little bit of crunchiness to the game. Quick bursts. Some weapons have got the perceived recoil not being felt until after the rounds have left the barrel, in particular the G11 and some of the experimental Soviet ones. I like the way they're handled. If you fire at a low rate, you can re-roll the ammo dice, which doesn't count as pushing it. That's a nice, realistic, pragmatic way to do it. I like that. There's the incapacitation rule. Now, the incapacitation rule basically has to do with the impact of the rounds. If the character is actually hit, not just having to duck because of a near miss, their coolness under fire takes a penalty for a high impact round. Yeah, I can follow that. There's a rule for recoil as well. Basically, if you fire lots of shots from a high recoil weapon, your chance of hitting goes down. So what negative modifier for firing lots, unless you're using a bipod or something similar. Yeah, again, nice rule, very simple. There's a bit of an article on sighting devices, a little bit on the ammunition table, and it talks about the different costs of the different magazine sizes. He does actually detail very well all the different magazine sizes, and then very usefully at the end there's a service rifle by country. Now that's a useful little chart. I know the bulk of them, but it does just give you the main service rifle, what the secondary service rifle is, and what the light machine gun is. Covering some countries that perhaps I wouldn't have thought were needed, like Iceland, who use the G3 apparently. I wasn't aware of that. They also give the local names for them. So for example, for Albania, you've got the AKM as the main weapon, called the Ash 78, and the AKMS as a secondary, called the Ash 82. Okay, that's a nice, useful little touch. And it does just give you a very quick overview. Just spotted in the US, it's got the M16A2 with secondary weapons being the M4, the M4A1 and the Car 15. I would have thought that the M16 A1 should probably be in there as well. As with anything, you're always going to spot little things. There is a lot of research gone into this, so gear, I do like that. Should you buy it? I think it's worth the money. He's planning to do more, so let's try and support the community out there. Yeah, there's probably stuff I'd add to it, but that any gamer would do that. Any gamer will pick this up and probably pick up different things to me. So yeah, it's definitely worthwhile. It's adding some useful weapons to the games. I did a very similar thing for 2nd edition, and I know how much work goes into one of these, particularly trying to create extra rules to cover things that aren't obvious. So recommended, and I'll see you soon for another review.